This story doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with the place that was too quiet to question. The kind of place that never expects evil. There are places in America where nothing seems to happen. Not because life is peaceful, but because it is predictable. Fox Hollow Farm sat in one of those places. A wide stretch of rural land, trees standing far enough apart to let light through, but close enough to keep secrets. Gravel roads that carried the same cars every day. Houses built with the assumption that danger belonged somewhere else. In towns like this, crime was something people watched on television. Violence belonged to cities. Evil had an address, and it wasn't here. The farm looked like proof of that belief. A large home, children's bicycles near the driveway, a swimming pool where laughter echoed in summer. From the road, it looked like success had settled down and decided to raise a family. No one noticed the way the woods behind the house grew quieter at night. No one asked why some parts of the land were avoided, even by animals. No one imagined that beneath the ordinary rhythm of rural life, something was accumulating, slowly, deliberately, out of sight. Because rural places don't prepare you for monsters, they prepare you for neighbors. And the man who lived here understood that better than anyone. The man who fit perfectly. From the outside, he did everything right. He worked hard, he dressed neatly, he volunteered at school. He smiled when spoken to and didn't speak when silence was expected. There was nothing theatrical about him, no dramatic cruelty, no visible rage. That was the point. Predators who survive for long periods do not look dangerous. They look compatible. They mirror the environment they hunt in. And in this place, compatibility meant normalcy. He had a family, children who trusted him, a wife who believed she knew the man she lived with, neighbors who waved from a distance and thought nothing more of it. If unease ever surfaced, it was fleeting, quickly buried under routine. And yet, beneath that surface, something was fractured. There were signs. There are always signs. A temper that appeared suddenly and vanished just as fast. Mood shifts explained away as stress. Moments of withdrawal that felt uncomfortable but not alarming. In quiet households, people learn to walk around tension instead of naming it. And so life continued, while elsewhere, miles away, people began to disappear. The disappearances that didn't lead anywhere. In the early 1990s, young men started vanishing. Not all at once, not in a pattern that made sense at first. They were seen at bars, at clubs, at parties, then nothing. No struggle, no witnesses, no bodies. Disappearance is a unique kind of horror. It offers no proof of violence, only absence. And absence is easy to ignore when it doesn't knock loudly. Police files grew thicker. Families waited. Friends replayed final conversations, searching for clues that weren't there. Some assumed these men had left voluntarily. Others believed they'd met with misfortune somewhere anonymous and unreachable. And because the disappearances were spread across time and location, they never crystallized into a single undeniable truth. Mysteries don't always fail because of incompetence. Sometimes they fail because they are too quiet. While the city searched for answers, the countryside remained unexamined. Fox Hollow Farm stayed off the map. What the house couldn't hide forever. Inside the home, tension grew. His wife noticed changes long before she understood them. The distance, the secrecy, the sense that certain questions were unwelcome. Then came the smells. Burning, not like wood alone, not like trash, something heavier, something wrong. And bones, small at first, scattered near the woods, light enough to dismiss, easy enough to rationalize. Animal remains, she told herself. Deer, coyotes, wildlife. In rural places, explanations like that are convenient. They allow life to continue without disruption. But fear doesn't disappear just because it's explained away. It waits. The marriage began to fracture. The house no longer felt safe, even when nothing specific could be named. Paranoia crept in, his and then hers. Eventually, the relationship reached a breaking point. Divorce doesn't always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives with exhaustion. When she left the house, she didn't know she was walking away from a crime scene that had not yet revealed itself. She didn't know the land behind her had already begun to give up its dead. The ground that spoke in fragments. When investigators finally arrived, they weren't prepared for what the woods contained. They expected evidence. They did not expect scale. Bone fragments surfaced from the soil, burned, crushed, scattered deliberately across acres. Not buried carefully, not marked, just dispersed, as if anonymity itself were part of the plan. Thousands of pieces, enough to suggest that this wasn't a single act of violence, or even a brief period of madness. This was repetition. This was practice. The farm wasn't a backdrop to a crime. It was an instrument. Fire pits told stories of destruction rather than warmth. Paths through the woods revealed patterns only visible in hindsight. The quiet property had absorbed years of violence without resistance. Land does not judge. It only holds. As evidence accumulated, the picture sharpened into something unbearable. A serial predator who had operated in plain sight, shielded by respectability and distance. The disappearances finally had a destination, but the man responsible was already gone. The ending that never arrived. Before police could confront him, he fled, not in panic, but with calculation. Days later, far from the farm, his body was found, death by his own hand, a final act of control. There would be no trial, no confession that explained everything, no list of names. Justice, in its formal sense, never came. Families received answers without closure. Investigators closed a case that still felt unfinished. The public learned too late that evil doesn't need spectacle. It only needs permission to remain unnoticed. Fox Hollow Farm was eventually abandoned. The house changed hands. The woods grew back. But some places never return to neutrality. Because land remembers, even when people try not to. After the discovery, when evil loses its mask. The moment the first fragments were confirmed as human, everything changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. Up until then, the case had still lived in the realm of uncertainty. Missing persons, circumstantial suspicion, unanswered questions that could still be negotiated with denial. But Bone does not negotiate. Bone does not speculate. Bone only testifies. Investigators stood on land that had been walked over countless times before, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. Every step now carried weight. Every inch of soil became a sentence waiting to be read. They did not find bodies. They found aftermath. Fragments burned until identity was almost erased. pieces crushed small enough to be overlooked, evidence scattered not randomly, but intentionally, so that no single location could ever tell the whole story. This was not panic disposal. This was design. And with that realization came something more unsettling than horror: recognition. Recognition that whoever did this had time, that whoever did this felt safe, that whoever did this never believed they would be interrupted. The farmhouse was no longer just a place where a family had lived. It became a map, one that revealed years of movement, repetition, and confidence. Paths worn subtly into the land told stories no witness ever could. Fire pits spoke of ritual rather than convenience. Clearings suggested familiarity, not improvisation. The investigation expanded outward, but the center held. This was not a crime that spilled into the countryside. It was one that belonged to it. And as evidence mounted, another truth became unavoidable. This was not a mystery that had just been solved. It was a reality that had been ignored. The man who was never meant to be seen. People often ask the wrong question. They ask why someone like this exists. But the more important question is how someone like this survives for so long. He did not live two separate lives. That idea is comforting but inaccurate. There was no sharp division between the man people knew and the man they never suspected. There was only one life, carefully curated to reveal just enough to remain believable. He understood social expectations intuitively, understood when to smile, when to speak, when silence would be interpreted as modesty rather than detachment. He learned early that attention could be dangerous, but invisibility could be mistaken for trustworthiness. He did not dominate rooms. He did not command presence. He let others fill the space. This made him unremarkable and therefore unexamined. Control was his defining trait, but not in the way people imagine. There were no dramatic displays of power, no visible coercion. Control for him existed in preparation, in choosing environments where resistance would be unlikely, and selecting moments where consent could be blurred, misunderstood, or retroactively erased by disappearance. The farm gave him something no urban setting ever could: insulation, distance, privacy, ownership. Land is a form of authority in rural spaces. What happens on it is presumed to belong to the owner, and that presumption creates a void, one where accountability thins out the farther you move from neighbors, roads, and shared oversight. He did not need to hide bodies. He only needed to fragment them, because fragments delay comprehension. They force reconstruction. They stretch investigations across years instead of days. They allow the perpetrator to remain present while the truth lags behind. And all the while, life continued. Children grew older. Seasons passed. The man remained where he had always been, not lurking, not fleeing, simply existing. That is the most disturbing aspect of all. Not that he was capable of violence, but that he was capable of patience. The damage that didn't end with death. When the truth surfaced, it did not arrive all at once for the families. It arrived in pieces. A phone call, a press conference, a headline that hinted without confirming. Some families learned that the search they had never stopped conducting was now over, without ever receiving what they had hoped for most: certainty. There were no remains to identify cleanly, no final moments to reconstruct. Only the knowledge that the disappearance had not been an accident or choice. Grief changed shape. Instead of hoping for return, They were forced to grieve an ending that could never be fully described. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss, the kind that resists closure because the mind cannot anchor itself to a clear narrative. There was no body to bury, no moment to mark as the end, no finality. And beyond the families, the damage spread outward. Communities experienced a quieter reckoning, one without public ceremonies or official apologies. People replayed memories privately. Conversations they had once dismissed now returned with sharp clarity. Moments that felt neutral before began to feel complicit in retrospect. Why didn't we ask more questions? Why didn't we notice? Why did safety feel so certain? These questions didn't demand answers. They demanded acceptance. Acceptance that harm can coexist with normal life, that violence does not always distort the environment it lives in. Sometimes it adapts so well that it becomes indistinguishable from routine. Even the investigators were changed. Solving a case like this does not bring satisfaction. There is no victory in uncovering years of unchecked harm. There is only responsibility to document accurately, to speak carefully, and to resist turning tragedy into spectacle. Because spectacle would have been easier, and easier would have meant repeating the same mistake that allowed this to happen in the first place. What quiet places teach us about evil? In the end, Fox Hollow Farm does not stand as a symbol of monstrosity. It stands as a warning about comfort. Comfort dulls curiosity. Comfort discourages interruption. Comfort tells us that what feels familiar must also be safe. Rural spaces are not dangerous by nature. Neither are families. Neither are ordinary lives. But the belief that danger announces itself, that it looks dramatic, unstable, foreign, is one of the most persistent myths we hold. Evil rarely arrives shouting. It arrives rehearsed. It studies what is expected and performs it well enough to avoid scrutiny. It learns which behaviors raise alarms and which inspire trust. It understands that most people would rather preserve a sense of normalcy than disrupt it with uncomfortable questions. And so it waits, not in hiding, but in plain sight. The land where this happened has changed hands. The house has known other occupants. Grass has grown back where soil was once disturbed. From the outside, nothing about it demands remembrance. But places like this do not lose their history simply because time passes. They remind us, quietly, that vigilance is not the same as suspicion, that paying attention is not cruelty, that asking questions is not an accusation. And most of all, they remind us that the absence of noise is not the absence of harm. Sometimes silence is the condition that allows it to grow. Sometimes it lives quietly, waiting for the world to stop paying attention. And sometimes the world does.